Shalom, hello, Boker Tov. This is Rav Johnny. I really hope you're all well. I'm sorry I'm not with you, but I am coming back probably around about the time that you're listening to this shiur, and I very much hope that we can reconnect and start our shiur once again, person to person, and continue to learn together because it gives me so much chizuk and so much insight from the ideas you share, questions you ask, and the Torah atmosphere that we create together. This Shabbos we read Parshat Beshalach, and what I'd like to do is explore a detail in the Shira which I suspect most of us have overlooked, but it's a detail sufficiently important that the Midrash Tanchuma, chooses to talk about it. This is obviously going to raise some questions, and those questions we're going to try and make sense of, looking at more recent commentaries. Let's look through the psukim. We are told in the middle of the Shira, to translate, because especially with these kind of poetic words of the Tanakh, some of us struggle to make sense of them. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up, the flood stood straight like a wall, the deeps froze in the heart of the sea. What beautiful language, describing the great drama that is Kriyas Yam Suf. But when you look at the English, when you look at the Hebrew, if you understand the Hebrew, you realize that these metaphors are clearly very deep, but not necessarily obvious. The blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. Nostrils, is that relating to af and anger? Could well be. The flood stood straight like a wall. That idea that the water is like walls is explicit in the Tanakh. But what is the message of the waters being like walls? But the words I'd like us to focus on are the following. The deep froze in the heart of the sea. The deeps froze. Kafu, yeah, or kafu. We know what a freezer is. Makfi. So we know that's a word. It means to freeze. What's the idea that the water freezes? And in particular, what does it mean when it says belev yam, in the heart of the sea? Where is the heart of the sea? So those are the questions we're going to explore. Methodologically, we're going to try and ask ourselves, what is this Midrash teaching us? It's going to try and make sense of those words, kaf'ub tomot lev yam. Then we're going to ask ourselves, Azma, so what do we do with this? What is this message? Let's see. So we move on to Midrash Tanchuma. Kaf'u tomot as an kamin kippah. Says the Midrash, when it says the deeps froze in the heart of the sea, God fashioned them like a kind of vault. Vault meaning, stuck. As if, though we think of the waters as spilling over, in fact, there was parts of the water that were frozen, literally unmoving. So that's point number one. The notion that in Kriyat Yam Suf, some of the water was held kaf'u tomot lev yam. But continues the Midrash Tanchuma. What do we mean when we say lev yam? What do we mean when we say in the heart of the sea? Heichan libo shel adam natun. In response to the question belev yam, heichan libo shel adam natun. Where is man's heart located? As if to say, what are we saying here with belev yam? Where is the heart of a sea? Well, let's begin by asking, where is the heart of a person? Mishnei Chalakim. Right, it's located just above 2/3 of his height. Okay, Mishnei meaning it's 2 parts above. Kach kafa alehem hayam mishnei chalakim. So continues the Midrash Tanchuma. So too, the water became frozen, or it translates here as congealed, at 2/3 of the depth. Okay, fine. So we now know where the freezing took place. But like, what's the message here? And now it tells us something remarkable. Really, it's a really deep idea. Hayam lo haya lo lev, nitan lo lev. The sea had no heart, but in this moment, it got a heart. Ha'elah lo haya lo lev, nitan la lev. The terebinth had no heart, but then a heart was ascribed to it. Which terebinth? The heart, the terebinth on which Avshalom was to hang. השמיים לא היה להם לב, ניתן להם לב. The heavens, the skies, had no heart. Then God gave it a heart. שנאמר בהר בוער באש, עוד לב השמיים. Before we go on, let's take a moment to consider what the Midrash Tanchum was telling us. It initially told us about what Kaf Utomot meant and where Kaf Utomot happened. But then it goes on and informs us, Belev Yam, you're right, a sea generally doesn't have a heart. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the sea a heart. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Elah a heart. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Shemaim a heart. That there are moments in history when things like water, when things like trees, when things like sky adopt some kind of moral consciousness, maybe, or simply put, adopt some kind of heart, emotions, that they have an identity unto themselves. So let's explore this idea a little bit further. What do we have here? We have a sea that previously didn't have a heart, that now has a heart. Wow. Now what the Midrash Tanchum is saying is something very, very deep. The sea that didn't have a heart was given a heart in order to be the mechanism, in order to be the conduit to punish the Mitzrim who did have a heart in theory, biologically, but in their treatment of Am Yisrael, they were heartless. Isn't that what an interesting idea? The water has no heart and it's given a heart to show the Mitzrim who do have a heart are acting heartlessly. That's Musa. The heart of the sea is as if to teach to Mitzrim, you are heartless, even I have a heart and you don't. The water's Meichiach. The water is rebuking the Mitzrim. The water has moral agency. ניתן ללב, יפרע מאבשלום שהיה לו לב, וגנב 3 לבבות, לב אביו ולב בית דין, ולבב אנשי ישראל. What does the Elah do? The terebinths do? This tree gets a heart to be Meichiach, to rebuke Avshalom, who, though biologically has a heart, acts heartlessly, in fact goes on to say the Midrash, so heartlessly, he does a disservice to and shows disrespect to the heart of his father, the heart of the Beis Din, the heart of Anshe Yisrael. A tree is a moral voice in that story, showing as if it knows the difference between right and wrong more than him. The sea, as if it knows the difference between right and wrong more than them. יבוא השמיים שלא היה להם לב, ניתן להם לב, יוריד האמן לישראל שיש להם לב, וקיבלו את התורה בכל לב, ואהבו את קונם בכל לב. What's the difference? Shamayim. The Shamayim doesn't generally have a lev. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave it a lev. But why? Why? Perhaps also to be Meichiach, to rebuke, to demonstrate a lacking in terms of Am Yisrael. But rather than with the Yam Suf, which was Einish punishment, and rather than with the Allah, which was Onish punishment, what is a man? Well, the heaven providing the man, it's a matan, it's a gift. Because sometimes a heart doesn't come along to smack you in the face. Sometimes it comes along and it reminds me of your worth. It gives you motivation. The Shemaim there, Amachazek Ham Yisrael. The Shemaim there are true, affirming the fact that there were moments when they lacked emunah, complaining to Kadosh Baruch Hu, how are you going to feed us? But in feeding them, this restores the heart of Am Yisrael. Through this, they learn from the heart of Shemaim. They learn from the heart in order to strengthen their heart, in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with heart, so they can love God b'chol lev. So we have in this Midrash are three different snapshots in the story of Am Yisrael. You now understand why it goes from Shmot to Shmuel, and then back to a story related in Shmot, and then detailed further in Sefer Dvarim, because the first two are about the lev of the inanimate, to being meichiach, to being critical, to teaching a lesson, to punishing. And the third is to teach us. Shemaim did that, but Shemaim did that not in terms of a negative response to negative behavior, but instead as a positive response to the needs of the people. So water can have a heart, a tree can have a heart, and Shemaim can have a heart. But ask of Chaim al-Azwi, what is this about? Okay, so we've read the words, and he quotes this Midrash over here. This is all just a recounting of what we've just read. You know, often when people quote a Midrash, they don't presume you have the book in front of you. So he says, what's this all about? And he explains the following, or he raises a question, then explains. He says, "K'tzat kaseh, ma'u hamuvan b'chol ela nizkarim b'midrash?" What's the meaning of all these three incidents that the Midrash delineates? Lev, Hashem Nisbarach Natanem Lev, that they didn't have a heart and God gave them a heart. He says, Im ken zu bria chadasha. If that's the case, then it seems that God created a new entity. The water wasn't regular water. God put a heart into the sea. God put a heart in a tree. God put a heart into Shemaim. He says, however, didn't we learn from Kohelet, ben kol chadash tachat hashemesh? Nothing's new as under the sun. He's asking a question of, is this a new creation? We thought that everything God created in the world was already part of the blueprint from Sheshit and Bereshit. והיום מפרשים שאם אנחנו רואים דבר חדש במקרים שונים, או אפילו בניסים, אין זה דבר חדש לפי שכן שנבראו בטבעם כשהיה צורך בעזרתם יבוא לעזור, אך כל זה מוכן כבר מזמן עברם. We've been taught that even things which appear new in creation were really part of the plan of creation. So he says, how do we make sense of this Midrash? Was his heart something created in that moment? And if it wasn't, if it was always there, well, where was it? What are we talking about? If you look at the teachings, the beautiful, beautiful teachings of Sama Mitzvah in his Artafun, you'll see There he teaches us that the wisdom of God is found in every material object. Even if it seems completely inanimate, even if it seems completely limited to its objective quality, there is still within it Chochmas Hashem. God in his wisdom founded the world. And the foundation of the world, of the land, which maintains the world, that's what we call Chochmah. Meaning, we're talking about how, firstly, nature has its ways of nature. That's Chochmah, as if God put the DNA of nature into every object. And the fact that a flower continues to blossom, the fact that animals behave that way, the fact that sea moves in one way or another, those objects are following Chochmas Torah, which are part of the, let's say, the DNA, the substructure of each of those objects. But then he wants to take it a bit further. הוא הנה הכוח הרוחני הנצחי התמיר ונעלם אשר בו תמצא החוכמה ועליה נתייסדה בטבע אמונתה. But what the psalmist Slobodka is telling us is, don't just merely dismiss this as being nature. See this as being God. See this as being an instruction that Kodesh Baruch Hu has given to every object. Every object has its tafkid. Every object has rules to observe. Every object has, as I say, its own both physical but also spiritual DNA. And just because you don't see that doesn't mean it's not there. ולזה אפשר לומר שהמובן הוא כמו שיש ללב צורך שדרכו עוברים כל האורחים שבגוף. ככה יש גם לב בכל דומם שמגיע הזמן בשעת הצורך למלא רצון הבורא יתברך ממלאים הם תפקידם בכל ליבה. Just as a heart needs to pump blood to all parts of the body. And sometimes, for example, in a time of great distress, our heart kind of pushes us more. We run and our heartbeat increases. Well, there are moments when certain objects have to fulfill certain tasks. When those objects have to step up, shall we say. That's when their heart is stirred. That's when what is already innately within those objects starts to beat a bit faster. That's when we see, we hear, we observe the heart of the sea, the heart of the Allah, the heart of Shamayim. It was always there. But it didn't need to do what it needed to do until it needed to do. It's as if, in terms of the birth process, we don't realize how our physiology allows us to do certain things. And yet when the time comes, he knows what to do. Here the water knows what to do. The tree knows what to do, the Shamayim knows what to do, because it was part and parcel of what that thing was from its outset. Not just part of its biology, its physiology, it's part of its spiritual nature, part of its chokhmah, part of its wisdom, part of why that thing existed all that time. Now, we can skip the last bit. So what we learn from here is everything has a purpose, and there are certain things whose purpose continues, but then who, given certain stresses or needs, is able to birth or enable or step up to a whole different level of responsibility. We see that with the water, and we see that with the sky, and we see that with the tree. We call that lev. The idea of lev really being, this is when we feel our task is being enabled and fulfilled. Now, in an essay in a journal called Ozora, I saw some discussion of this Midrash as well. And I want to quote from it because it also gives some kind of clarity. I don't know the author of this piece. I think it was nameless. But nevertheless, I want to see what they have to say. It doesn't seem to make much sense, this Midrash, says this article. So here the question is less about what is the lev of the water, but why do I care that the water is divided between this and that? 2/3? Because like at the lev of a person, that's the lev of the sea. Why do I care? Lev. Moreover, is a heart really something frozen at some point in the body? No. Why is the word lev being used? You see something, you're going to call it a heart. You see an orange, you call it a heart. Admittedly, by the way, Chazal, yes, we compare the esrog to a heart, but I think we do that for deeper reasons. He's saying, so you see a more solid a part of the water at a certain, height. You all of a sudden have this whole kind of theology that this is a heart. What's the idea of saying the sea didn't have a heart and then did have a heart? What kind of heart was missing? It continues and he says, he says, let me explain. Kriyas Yamsuf, there were absolute, evident, visible wonders and miracles. And not only were those miracles remarkable, it led to gluyim. I should have explained this earlier. It led to revelation. That's what I meant. They weren't just wonderful wonders, they were remarkable revelations. The people felt God was revealing God's self to them. The people felt that Kodesh Baruch was mamash, right, tangible and present. They cry out Zekeli Vanvehu. ויש שם בוודאי גם רגשי קודש מופלאים וסרת לב גדולה למראה הניסים הרבים והעצומים שנעשו שם ונקמת אל במצרים באופן מופלא. Basically, it would have been an incredible emotional, spiritual experience, קריאס ים סוף. אבל בכך לבד לא היה די להביא את העם לידי הדרגה הגבוהה שאפילו אליה אנשי דור המדבר. He says, okay, so it would have been an amazing emotional, spiritual experience. But why was there a need to bring them to a point that they were able to tangibly experience Gilui Shechina? This idea that Rata Shiv Chalayam Mashlo Ra'ai Cheskel Ben Buzi. Why does a Shiv Chalayam need to be able to be greater than Yecheskel Ben Buzi at Kriyas Yamsuf? Why don't you simply say, Kriyas Yamsuf was awesome, I go through the sea, wonderful. Why does that person have a spiritual upgrade that they are now basically stronger or more capable or more tuned spiritually than even one of our greatest prophets? What's the relationship between Gilui Shechina and the Nisim Niflois? People have Nisim Niflois, doesn't make them a prophet. רק על ידי הכיפה שמעל שני חלקי הלב, שיחטא בין ההבנה בכל המאורע, בין הגשות העצומות שנלוו עליו, זך לדרגה שאפאמינו בהשם ומשה עבודה. So it continues, it says, when we talk about this kippah, remember, not kippah meaning on the head, but kippah here, this idea of vault, this idea of sealing, S-E-A-L-I-N-G, or you could also be sealing, C-E-I-L-N-G. This kind of kippah, like kippah barzel or whatever. So what the purpose of this is in actual fact to highlight a freezing of, kaf uba, tomod leviam, and a unification of different dimensions of the human experience. He says, have a look at the verses. אין צפת תורה רק ההבנה וההכרה של יריסל את היד הגדולה שעשה השם במצרים. אף לא רק הרגשה הפחד מהקדוש ברוך הוא ביראה את השם, אלא דווקא ההקרבה מיזוג בין שני הדברים האלה הביאה לתוצאה המופלאה והנוי בהשם ובמשה עבדו. Am Yisrael in this moment believe in God and in Moshe's servant. What leads them to this? A unification of mind and heart. Don't forget, when we say the word heart, we mean both the thinking part of a human being, which we nowadays call the mind or the brain, and the feeling part of a person, which we often call the heart or the emotions. Lev means both. But what we're saying here about the Lev is how in this moment, Am Yisrael understands something, Ba'amina B'Hashem, of Moshe Avdo, and they feel something too. With Kriyas Yamsuf, it wasn't just an intellectual experience, and it wasn't just an emotional experience, it was both. It was both because that's what Am Yisrael needed. They needed to understand the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and they needed to feel the Kodesh Baruch Hu. They needed to understand Moshe Rabbeinu and feel Moshe Rabbeinu. They needed the head and they needed the heart, which all fall under the category of Lev in terms of Lashon Chazal. כפו תומו בלב ים, נקפא להם הים משני חלקי למען הכיפה. The whole idea of describing the water as a body, the upper part and the lower part, is to talk about how altogether these are frozen, these are combined. אין זה רק דמיון חיצוני ללב, אלא בכך התבטא מה שאירע להם לישראל לנוכח המאורות שהיו על הים. הצעה שהקים על הים בקריאת ים סוף הייתה תמונה המשקפת את אשר אירע לליבם של ישראל, שהתאחדו שני חלקי לבבם, ניתן להם לב שלם. The author is basically saying this idea of freezing isn't about the temperature of the water. It's about the combination, the unification of the different dimensions of the human experience, the mind and the heart. In this moment, the waters demonstrated this connectivity, because in that moment, the people were connected. ואמין בהשם ובמשה עבדו. הוא הוכה בעשר מכות. האם לא הבין שהכל בא מיד השם, הוא שולט בשמיים ובארץ במים ובחיות ובכל בריאה, שהוא ציווה ויעש. ודאי שהבין. כל כך הבין עד שהודה בהודעת בעל דין, הצדיק, השם צדיק ואני עמי והרשעים. Pharaoh, he was meted out all these plagues. The Mitzrayim, they had all these markers. Did they not understand the Kadosh Baruch Hu? אם פרעה לא הרגיש את המכות, ודאי שהרגיש. Did Pharaoh not feel the markers? Of course he felt them. כל מכה במכה הרגיש על עצמו הרבה טוב, על עבדיו. אם כן, איפה, מדוע לא הגיע למסקנה מבקשת ממנו להוציא את ישראל ממצרים? Ask the author here, if Pharaoh understood the markers and he felt the markers, why didn't he capitulate? Why didn't he let Am Yisrael free? That was the right thing to do. And this helps understand what happened to Kodesh Baruch Hu made Pharaoh's heart heavy. שלא נתן ליבו לבצע את המוטל עליו, לחבר בין נפשותיו לבין עבודתו. God basically disabled or impeded or interrupted the flow between thinking part of Pharaoh and the feeling part of Pharaoh. וממילא למרות שגם הבין וגם הרגיש, היה יכול להימנע מלהוציא בני ישראל ממצרים. Even though he understood and even though he felt, the whole picture wasn't clear to him. What that means now is Kriyas Yam Suf contains imagery which is a powerful critique of the Mitzrayim and of Pharaoh. Remember we learned in our first piece from the Saba Mislobodka, the idea on the basis of the Midrash, I don't know why this keeps on popping up, on the basis of the Midrash, that the sea adopts a heart, the tree adopts a heart, the Shemaim adopts a heart. To be Maichiach, to critique, to rebuke, to communicate a message. So that's what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're telling the Mitzrayim, we have a heart and you have a heart, but you don't use it. How can it be the water has a heart and a tree has a heart? The Shemaim has a heart? It's to teach the Mitzrayim, use your heart. And then, as we see here, what is a message of how people had a Gilu Shechina at Yam Suf? Well, what is a lev? A lev is two things, thinking and feeling, according to Lashon Chazal. And the people felt and thought. How come Pharaoh didn't feel and think and therefore let the people out early? Because there was something impeding him. Because he'd been stubborn. The water comes along and as if demonstrates the importance of unifying head and heart, the thinking dimension of who we are and the feeling dimension of who we are. And in so doing, it critiques Pharaoh and it shows him and the Mitzrayim. When you separate feelings from thinking, when you disconnect one from the other, you can know things and you can think things and yet you'll act wrong. So I find these two commentaries on this cryptic Midrash to be absolutely fascinating. Then in terms of us, firstly, now we actually understand these words are now meaningful to us. We may have sung the Shira many, many times. We may not have understood the meaning of these words. Hopefully now we have a better understanding. Point number two, we realize that every part of creation has a heart. And sometimes parts of creation are ready and waiting to act in a way in fulfillment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mission. They all have chokhmah. Their heart is ready to pump a little bit more. We've learned here how things can teach us lessons. Chafetz Chaim famously said, we learn from the phonograph that words can be recorded. Nowadays, I'd say we learn from WhatsApp and all those kind of things far, far more. That a few words can go very, very far if you wish them to. L'tova or l'ra'a. We can learn from things. Items can convey messages. They can be conduits of moral and social critiques. So we've seen this. They can also teach us positively, and we've already alluded to that. But what do we learn here? What do we learn from Rav Chaim al-Azri? What he taught us is, as I say, there's a time and place for everything. There's a purpose of everything. What we learn from the Oz Orah is, don't ever live in a way that separates your thinking from your feeling. Yeah, we sometimes need more of one than the other. With men who put on the tefillin, on the head and on the heart to show the importance of combining the two. The idea that lev means both is important for us. The idea that this is what Pharaoh was lacking is important to consider. I'll end with one quick insight. In one of the Sfarim of the Kotzker Rebbe, or penning the Torah of the Kotzker Rebbe. You know, many men wear a gartel to separate between the lower body and the upper body, as if to say there is a more material or physically driven way of living, and then there's a more spiritual way of living. And they have a gartel in order to create that separation. Well, the Kotzker Rebbe said, I never wear a scarf because I don't ever have a division between my head and my heart. Now, just on a very practical level, when it's cold, you should wear a scarf. I think what he was saying here is something much, much deeper than necessarily whether you should wrap up on a cold day. You see, that's my Jewish mother coming out. Make sure you wrap up. But more significantly, what the Rebbe was saying is, don't ever put yourself in a position where you can divide head and heart. Because if you do that, it's a slippery slope towards Pharaoh land. What we learned here from the Ozorah is that what happens in the sea is an illustration of what should be. Unification of the thinking and of the feeling. And that is then demonstrated, that Gilui is demonstrated with Am Yisrael, V'aminu b'Hashem, of Moshe Avda. I hope this has been of help, of interest. I very much look forward to seeing you again. Sorry for the croaky voice, the end of a long speaking tour. But I look forward to seeing you in Eretz Yisrael in the coming week. And look after yourselves and Shabbat Shalom.